Friends, welcome. I want to talk to you today about something that is happening right now to our neighbors in the north in Canada. And I want to talk about it not because the details of Canadian auto tariffs are fascinating in and of themselves, though they are revealing, but because what is happening there is a perfect textbook example of the contradictions of late stage capitalism. It is a story about a country caught between two declining and rising empires, trying to navigate a global economic system that was never designed to serve the people of that country, but rather to serve the flow of capital, the accumulation of profit, and the geopolitical interests of the dominant power. We are looking at a situation where the Canadian government has made a decision, a very controversial decision in the eyes of the United States, to allow Chinese electric vehicles into their country. Now, let's look at the specifics. Canada is dropping the 100% duty on Chinese EVs. Instead, they are allowing about 50,000 vehicles into the country at a tariff rate of 6.1%. This is a dramatic shift. It is a break from the lockstep march that Canada usually performs alongside the United States economic policy. Up until 2024, Canada had accepted Chinese vehicles at that 6.1% rate. But then, following the United States, following the dictates of an American empire terrified of Chinese competition, they raised that duty to effectively 106%. And now they are walking it back. Why? This is the question we must ask as Marxian economists. We do not look at this as a random change of heart. We do not look at this as a politician simply changing their mind. We look for the material conditions. We look for the economic necessity that drives this decision. And here is what we find. China, in response to those high tariffs, said very simply, we will target your agriculture. We will target your canola oil. And so a deal was struck. You lower the tariffs on our cars, we lower the tariffs on your oil. It is the old-fashioned horse trading of the merchant class played out on the level of nation states. But there is more to it than that. The deal aims to create joint ventures. It aims to create jobs for Canadian workers. But let us stop there. Let us pause and look at the history, because without the history, you understand nothing. You cannot understand the present moment if you do not understand the trajectory that brought us here. Canada's auto manufacturing sector has been shrinking. It has been dying a slow death for a quarter of a century. In the year 2000, Canada produced around 3 million units. By 2025, that number had collapsed to 1.3 million. That is not a recession. That is not a dip. That is a structural dismantling of an industry. That is deindustrialization. And why did it happen? Did Canadian workers suddenly forget how to build cars? Did the machines stop working? No. It happened because the logic of global capitalism dictates that capital will always move to where labor is cheapest, or where the subsidies are highest, or where the market is largest. And for a long time, Canada was losing that race. Now, the introduction of American tariffs, tariffs designed by the United States to protect American corporations, has actually accelerated the decline of Canadian industry. This is the irony that you must appreciate. The United States claims to be protecting North American industry, but in doing so, it squeezes its junior partner. It squeezes the satellite economy that is Canada. And so Canada is desperate. It is looking for a lifeline. It is looking anywhere. China is not the only country Canada is striking deals with. They signed a memorandum of understanding with Korea on clean vehicle manufacturing. They are running around the globe, hat in hand, trying to find someone, anyone, who will invest in their productive capacity. In early February, the Canadian government released a new automotive strategy. They restored a $5,000 federal credit for electric vehicles because the money ran out in 2025. They plan to offer tax credits for manufacturers. But here is the problem. Here is the fundamental contradiction that no amount of tax credits can solve. Experts are telling us quite correctly that if Canada's relationship with the United States does not improve, international automakers are simply not going to invest there. Why? Because Canada does not have a market. Domestic car sales in Canada are only 1.8 to 2 million units a year. Compare that to the United States. New car sales in the U.S. are about 8 times that amount. This is the reality of being a smaller capitalist economy next to a hegemon. Canada exports around 90% of the vehicles it makes. And who do they export them to? Overwhelmingly to the United States. And imports make up about the same percentage of vehicles sold in Canada. The Canadian economy is not independent. It is integrated. It is a subsidiary. It is a branch plant economy. And when the head office in Washington, D.C. decides to change the rules, the branch plant suffers. It is impossible to overstate how integrated these economies were. Researchers say a single part, an engine, a transmission, can cross the border 7 or 8 times before the car is finished. This is the efficiency of the supply chain that capitalism built. But now that efficiency has become a vulnerability. Under this new agreement with China, 49,000 Chinese EVs are permitted. That number could rise to 70,000 in 5 years. And here is where the math of capitalism exposes the absurdity of the plan. Even if one single Chinese automaker were to capture that entire quota, even if they monopolized every single one of those 70,000 cars, it still would not be enough to justify building a factory. The high fixed costs of modern manufacturing, the sheer expense of the machinery and the robotics require that a plant make a minimum of 200,000 to 250,000 vehicles to be profitable. Profitability is the only metric that matters, not jobs, not the environment, not the needs of the Canadian people. Profit. And without that volume, there is no profit. So what is likely to happen? The Canadian government will allocate shares of that 49,000 quota to different automakers. One company gets 15,000, another gets 10,000. This leaves any potential factory with a huge balance of vehicles they have to sell somewhere else. But where? Where are they going to go? They cannot go to the United States. The wall is up. Maybe they go to Europe, maybe the UK, maybe Mexico, or maybe, and this is the most likely outcome, they simply do not do it at all. The promise of jobs, the promise of a revitalized industry, it evaporates. It turns out to be a fantasy. And hanging over all of this is the threat from the United States. Officially, U.S. policy is a 25% tariff on non-U.S. content. But effectively, it works out to a 10 to 12% duty. But now, because Canada has dared to make a deal with China, because Canada has dared to exercise a tiny sliver of sovereignty, President Trump has threatened a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods and services, not just cars, everything. This is economic warfare. This is a siege. The head of the group representing Detroit automakers in Canada called this deal a vehicle-sized irritant. That is a polite way of saying it is a disaster for their relationship. American manufacturers make up only about 23% of Canadian auto production. The Japanese makers, Toyota and Honda, make up the other 77%. So we have to look at this and ask, what is the Canadian worker supposed to do? Brian Kingston, the head of the group representing GM, Ford, and Stellantis, lists the reasons for the decline, the cyclical nature of the industry, disruptions from trade talks, retooling for EVs. He says Canada has everything the U.S. needs to pivot away from China: critical minerals, hydroelectric power, nuclear power. But having the resources is not enough. Having the labor is not enough. In a capitalist system, you must also have the permission of the capital holders. You must have the blessing of the market. And right now, Canada has neither. It is trapped. It is trapped by its geography. It is trapped by its history. And most of all, it is trapped by a global economic system that pits nations against one another in a race to the bottom, leaving the workers in Oshawa and Windsor and Oakville to wonder if they will have a job next year. This is not a failure of policy. I want to be very clear about this. This is not because the Prime Minister made a mistake. This is not because the Trade Minister is incompetent. This is the system working exactly as it is intended to work. The system is designed to concentrate wealth. It is designed to concentrate power. And when you have a system like that, the smaller players, the weaker economies, they get crushed. They get squeezed. Canada is trying to play a game where the rules are written by the United States and China, and they are finding out that in that game, they are not a player. They are the ball. They are being kicked back and forth. When we return to the fundamental Marxian analysis, we look at the surplus value. We look at who produces the wealth and who appropriates it. The Canadian auto worker produces immense wealth. For decades, they produced millions of cars, generating billions in profits for General Motors, for Ford, for Chrysler. Where did that profit go? Did it stay in the Canadian communities? Did it build better schools and hospitals in Ontario? Some of it perhaps through taxes, but the vast majority of it left. It went to shareholders in New York, in London, in Tokyo. And now that the profit calculation has shifted, now that it is slightly more profitable to build elsewhere, or now that the political risks are too high, that capital is fleeing, it is abandoning the very workers who created it. This deal with China is a desperate attempt to stem the bleeding. It is an attempt to bring some capital back in, but notice the terms: joint ventures, integration into the Chinese supply chain. It is simply trading one master for another. It is trading dependence on American capital for dependence on Chinese capital. It does not solve the fundamental problem of the Canadian economy, which is that it is not owned and controlled by the people who live and work there. It is owned and controlled by foreign interests. And as long as that is the case, Canada will remain vulnerable. It will remain subject to the whims of foreign leaders and foreign CEOs. Let us dig deeper into the reaction from the United States, because this is where the velvet glove of diplomacy comes off and the iron fist of imperialism is revealed. We are told in the polite language of international relations that the United States is concerned about national security. This is the phrase they always use. When they want to protect the profits of Ford or General Motors, they talk about national security. And so, because Canada has decided to allow a modest number of Chinese electric vehicles into its own market, 49,000 cars, a drop in the bucket of the global auto trade, President Trump threatens a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods and services. Think about what that means. It means that if Canada does not arrange its internal economy exactly the way Washington demands, the United States is willing to destroy the Canadian economy overnight. This is not the behavior of a partner. This is not the behavior of an ally. This is the behavior of a boss. It is the behavior of a landlord telling the tenant, if you don't paint the walls the color I like, I'm throwing you out on the street. The head of the group representing Detroit automakers in Canada called this deal a vehicle-sized irritant. Look at the language, an irritant. The livelihood of millions of Canadians, the sovereignty of a nation is reduced to an irritant for the CEOs in Detroit. And let us look at the absurdity of the logistics here. We know because researchers have told us that a single auto part, an engine, a transmission, crosses the Canada-US border 7 or 8 times during production. It goes back and forth, back and forth. Why? Because the corporations designed it that way to squeeze out every penny of efficiency, to take advantage of tax loopholes here and labor costs there. But now that very integration is being used as a weapon against Canada. The U.S. policy is officially a 25% tariff on non-U.S. content. Effectively, it's a tax on every car. And they are saying to Canada, if you let the Chinese in, we will shut this border down. So Canada scrambles. The Canadian government releases a new automotive strategy. And what is this strategy? Is it to build a robust public transportation system? Is it to redesign their cities so people don't need cars? No, it is to throw money at the corporations. They restored the $5,000 federal credit for electric vehicles because the fund ran out in 2025. They are offering tax credits for manufacturers. I want you to understand what this is. This is the government taking the wealth produced by the Canadian working class through their taxes and handing it directly to the auto companies and the people who can afford to buy new electric cars. It is a transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top. They call it a subsidy. They call it an incentive. I call it state welfare for corporations. The government is terrified that if they don't bribe these companies, they will leave. And they are right, they will leave, because that is the nature of capital. It has no loyalty to a flag. It has no loyalty to a community. But even with these bribes, even with the tax credits, experts are saying it might not be enough. Why? Because of the market size. Domestic car sales in Canada are tiny compared to the US. If Canada is shut out of the US market, no international automaker, not the Germans, not the Japanese, not the Chinese, will want to invest there. Why build a factory in a country that is an island? Why build a factory in a country that has been blockaded by its neighbor? This brings us back to the sheer inefficiency of the capitalist market mechanism. We talked about the quota, 49,000 Chinese EVs. We talked about how a factory needs to make 200,000 cars to break even. So what happens? The government will likely slice up that pie. They will give a quota of 15,000 to one company, 10,000 to another, and the result, no one builds a factory because the math doesn't work. The anarchy of the market combined with the bureaucratic fumbling of the state creates a situation where nothing gets built, no jobs are created, and the green transition stalls. The companies will be left with a surplus of cars. Where will they go? The script tells us they might try Europe. They might try the UK. They might try Mexico. They are like wandering ghosts looking for a market to haunt. Maybe we will go here. Maybe we will go there. This is not a plan. This is chaos. This is a system that cannot coordinate production to meet human needs. It can only coordinate production to chase profit. And when the profit isn't there, the whole machine grinds to a halt. And what about the green aspect of this? We are told this is all about saving the planet. Clean vehicle manufacturing. Canada signs a memorandum of understanding with Korea. Canada touts its hydroelectric power, its nuclear power. Brian Kingston, the lobbyist for GM and Ford, says Canada has everything the US needs to pivot away from China. Critical minerals, the raw materials for the next generation of batteries. Do you hear how he speaks of his own country? He speaks of it as a supply depot for the American empire. We have what you need. Please don't hurt us. Canada is offering itself up as a resource colony. Dig up our minerals, take our power, use our water. Just please let us keep a few assembly jobs. It is a humiliating position, and it is a position that ignores the environmental reality. We are not saving the planet by replacing millions of gas cars with millions of electric cars that are produced through a massive carbon intensive global supply chain shipped across oceans and powered by grids that are often still dirty. We are simply creating a new product line for capitalism. We are creating a new way to extract value. The Canadian auto worker is being told that their future depends on beating the Chinese worker. They are told we have to lower our wages, we have to increase our productivity, we have to accept these tariffs because the Chinese are coming. This is the oldest trick in the book. It is divide and conquer. The Canadian worker has more in common with the Chinese worker than they do with the CEO of General Motors or the Prime Minister of Canada. Both workers are being squeezed. Both workers are seeing their lives disrupted by decisions made in boardrooms thousands of miles away. If we want to solve this problem, and by this problem I mean the decline of industry, the threat of trade war, the climate crisis, we cannot do it within the framework of global capitalism. We cannot do it by striking better deals or by adjusting tariffs from 100% to 6.1%. Those are band-aids on a gaping wound. What would a real solution look like? It would look like an economy that is planned democratically by the people who live in it. Imagine if the auto factories in Oshawa and Windsor were owned by the workers and the communities. Imagine if, instead of waiting for a Chinese company or an American company to decide if they are profitable enough, the Canadian people decided we need transportation, we need buses, we need trains, we need electric vehicles for our fleet. And they simply set about producing them. They have the factories, they have the machines, they have the skilled labor, they have the minerals, they have the electricity. Why aren't they doing it? Because the profit mechanism stands in the way, because the relationship with the United States stands in the way, because the ideology of the free market, which is neither free nor a market in any real sense, forbids it. So Canada sits there, a wealthy nation, rich in resources, rich in talent, paralyzed because it is caught between the declining American empire, flailing about in its protectionist rage, and the rising Chinese power seeking new markets. And the Canadian government, faithful servants of the status quo, tries to dance between the raindrops. They try to please everyone and end up pleasing no one. They open the door a crack to China, and the U.S. threatens to blow the house down. This is the dead end of dependent capitalism. This is the lesson for Canada and indeed for the world. You cannot build a stable, prosperous, just society when your economy is a poker chip in someone else's casino until the workers of Canada and the US and China demand a system where production is for use, not for profit, where trade is based on mutual aid, not exploitation. We will see this story repeat itself. We will see the factories close. We will see the tariffs rise, and we will see the people pay the price. That is all the time we have for today. I hope this analysis has helped you see past the headlines and into the machinery of the system itself. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work. Thank you for listening.